Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Tom Medema, founder and CEO of Bubbles. Bubbles lets you quickly start a conversation with anyone by dropping a comment on anything you see on your screen and sharing a private link to start that conversation in the context of what you see. Tom, it's so exciting to chat with you and not only about your founder journey, and I know you've built companies and helped build companies not only in the US, but abroad as well in the Netherlands. And it's just so fascinating to think about the wealth of experience founders in your position have, because you can see different markets, see different trends, and then you come with an innovative product that I think a lot of times, especially for Bubbles, I'm excited about how it enables teams to communicate kind of async when they have time and when they're outside of priorities, making it extremely productive and efficient kind of process. So before we get into all that with Bubbles and the current company, what were you doing before you started Bubbles?
Yes, thanks, Julian. Awesome to be here. Love the title as well, Behind Company Lines. Wish I knew about you guys a couple of years ago. Yeah, so before Bubbles, I was living in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and I was fortunate to be introduced to one of the former co-founders of HelloFresh. They were actually looking to start a new company, a flower delivery app. We were very ambitious. We were looking to turn this offline flower industry into an online industry of multiple $billion. With that experience of Patrick is his name, I was able to really learn a lot and help them scale the company from 0 to 150 employees. I was the CTO there, and so I had to hire an engineering team from 0 to 1 really as well, learn how to motivate them, work on our engineering stack and so on. During that time as well, I was kind of forced to hire remotely. The Netherlands is a small country. We were kind of scrappy in terms of budget. And so it was back in 2014 where we started to hire remotely and really started to experience a lot of the difficulties around remote work. How do you convey your thoughts and ideas remotely? We'll get to this, but you can see, I guess, why it started to itch and why I wanted to solve for that.
Yeah. And I'm so curious because a lot of times, I guess this isn't really talked about, but how did you end up meeting your co-founder back at your previous company? And how were you kind of able to kind of make that connection? It's funny, co-founder relationships are always interesting. They always happen out of just happenstance a lot of times. I'm curious, how did you meet your co-founder?
Yeah, so technically I was a founding CTO there, but what is in there is that I think it's really all about building your network, making sure that you work with a lot of smart people, you can learn from them. And so in my case, I was actually working at a startup all the way in Bangkok. There were a group of ex-Rocket Internet founders who were starting companies in Southeast Asia. They were then asked the question by Patrick, do you know anyone who might be a good CTO for us? And I was then introduced to them. So I flew to Amsterdam, had a coffee with them. And before you know it, you are starting this company with nothing more but an idea.
Yeah. It's so funny. It's sometimes it takes just that interaction for a lot of co-founder relationships to develop, and then you're kind of off to the races. And thinking about scaling a team from 0 to 1 is one thing, but also from 1 to 10 and beyond to 100 employees. Talk about the growing pains of scaling, specifically an engineering team. A lot of times you're focusing on getting your MVP up and running, but then you're faced with customer feedback, different things that you could potentially invest in terms of feature building or maybe even a whole new version of the application. But how do you do that? Not only thinking about the scaling of what you're building, but also choosing the right people to build along with you.
Yes. So one, learn to say no. I think as important as it is to be able to build things, it's maybe even more important to be able to say no to building things. And so if you are able to do that and then realize what is that one thing that I really need to get done that's really going to be our differentiator, then you need to assemble a team around that. And that team needs to be motivated to build that, right? And so it's a lot about, I think, upfront hiring the right people rather than hiring people and then trying to motivate them. It's a lot harder. I would say hiring remotely seems like a table stakes nowadays.
Yeah.
It's just, if you only hire locally, you're just not going to get the kind of talent that you could get if you broaden your horizon. But then you're going to face issues around remote work as well, right? So think about remote culture, think about are these folks, people who are excited about remote work, who want to work remotely, and folks that you think you can trust, because you're potentially not going to have as much visibility as you would have in an
Yeah.
office environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you can think about kind of the remote culture for founders who are thinking about or are working with remote teams, what are some ways that you not kind of reinforce, I guess, the culture? And reinforce is kind of a harsh word, but I guess keep people kind of in the right direction with understanding where the company is going versus getting lost in tasks and just going about your day, kind of seemingly completing things. But how do you reinforce culture as a founder? What are some strategies that you use?
Yeah, so I think culture is really based on what you do more so than what you say. And so, for example, your leadership team should really be remote too. I don't think you should have a local office and then a couple of remote people. I think that would be really difficult, at least in terms of making the remote folks feel as much part of the team. And so that's one. You should really be remote, in my opinion, if you are going remote. And then second, like I said, make sure that you hire people who are actually willing to be remote, because it's a choice. And I think that
Yeah.
avoids a lot of trouble down the line. Third, we do local, let's say, offsites in every quarter or so. We'll fly to the same location and spend a couple of days, not just working together, but really building a relationship.
Yeah.
So that has really helped us at Bubbles. But also, you do need to think about how are you actually going to execute remotely, because many startups fail because they don't have product market fit. But I've also seen many startups fail because they just couldn't execute. You have limited resources, limited time. Even if you have the right idea, you're still going to have a very challenging job ahead of you. If you are remote, in many ways that can be amplified, especially in terms of how do you make sure that you're working on the right thing, that people are aligned, that there's visibility, and that the assumptions that you might normally kind of figure out at the coffee machine or during lunch with your colleagues, that those assumptions are suddenly made explicit rather than implicit, right? So use tools to do that. In our case, we were having a lot of issues with live video. So we were on Zoom a lot, and that resulted in a situation where especially engineers were taken out of context and easily lost an hour even before and after the call, because they had to try and get back into it. And so we're trying this kind of radical approach where we basically don't do live meetings except for stand up in the morning. Yeah. And all of our other meetings are completely asynchronous. Of course, we use Bubbles for that to be able to achieve that.
Yeah. What if the original idea, you mentioned remote working culture was kind of a challenge and you know, not only is doing things where you're trying to Zoom and everyone's trying to get maybe the idea of what's going on, but you know, in particular, what inspired the idea and why did you build the product the way you did in terms of the screen sharing, but also having yourself on there versus just screen sharing and showing kind of a direction without having the personal component to it? What made you go in this direction?
So it started with a personal frustration of something that should be trivial, which is just conveying your thoughts and ideas. Actually, I find it to be really difficult over email or Slack. And I've been in so many situations where in the end, we're like, well, let's just jump on a call. And so we're going to repeat the whole thing again. And it just takes so much time and so much trouble. And so it started with that. How do I make it easy to convey thoughts and ideas? And so I needed a rich medium, things like screen recording and so on. Yeah. Then there were already some tools out there that do things like screen recording, but I felt they were very lacking in terms of actually being able to go back and forth. They felt more like broadcasting tools rather than, let's say, this kind of threaded conversation that you might be used to from something like email or Slack. And so I imagine Zoom and Slack having a baby. That's kind of what I imagine as a solution to this problem.
Yeah. And thinking about just like the storing of all the information and the data and how easily accessible from a customer standpoint, from a user standpoint, is it to go through and look at, say, repository videos or connect it with a certain idea that you were working on? Because I feel like a lot of times we make these great products. We have some founders will make these great products, but it's the recall of those products that becomes a challenge to make sure that it's accessible. How did you think about building and designing something that not only you could use, say, once to explain an idea or thought, but that you could reference and continue to be so dynamic? How did you think about building that? And also, how did you get people to stay on it? Because I know a lot of times people will see a cool new tool or functionality, but it's the retention of that to continue getting them back. That's, I think, the more challenging part. How did you think about building, and how did you think about retaining people who are using the product?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we now have about 250,000 people, 50,000 people have used Bubbles, and we've spent very little on marketing. So most of that comes from the way we've built the product by making sure that it has an inherent product loop. So you want to share a bubble because that's how you can start a conversation, as well as by making that kind of first time experience very simple and have this experience, this aha moment immediately. That's why we basically removed things like sign up, the requirement to install something, and so on. Now, in a way, there's some tension there with your question around retention, because if you make it super low commitments for the user to try your product, then they may not necessarily be committed, right?
Right.
And so the way we think about it is, well, let's focus first on having them experience a great experience, but then give them, let's say, superpowers if they install something. In our case, that's a Chrome extension. I imagine in the future that will be a native app, a mobile app, etc. And so we've seen that works. Even people who just experience the web experience, even there we see pretty good retention. But also when they then install the Chrome extension, I think retention, quadruples if I remember correctly. So basically try to get them in the door and then find ways to continue to be present. One interesting tension as well is, are you going to ask them for their email address so that you can later on try to We've been very extreme on the side of not asking for emails and not really doing any nurture campaigns and so on. But we're slowly starting to experiment with that. All the while, though, keeping in mind that we must have people experience that aha moment, knowing that there are a million other apps that are trying to get their attention. They don't have a lot of time during the day to suddenly try out a new tool. So keeping that friction really low, I think is most important. So if you go to usebubbles.com, you click on the main CTA, you can actually immediately start a recording. You don't need to install anything. It's completely web-based. If you then have a good experience, you'd likely want to install the Chrome extension because it will then allow you to more easily start these conversations.
Yeah. And how did you define, say, your business model? Are you is it like a gateway of features that you're limiting for free users, and then once you want access to them, you give them access? Is it a subscription model? How do you essentially think about balancing out that the commitment, getting people on board, getting traction, but then also finding a way to monetize? Because it's difficult. You can do it in so many ways, but it really depends on the customers and how they want to consume the product. How have you thought about kind of in terms of monetizing the platform and ways that you can use it, the monetization, vehicle to, say, incentivize users to continue to go back to the platform?
Yeah, great question. So we're quite ambitious in that I didn't like the way that remote workers were forced to work odd hours, try and adjust their schedule to other people. Actually, we did a survey with about 500 people, and I think 30% or so on a daily basis had to work outside of working hours just to be able to accommodate for their teammates. 80% of them thought that many of their meetings actually were redundant and could have been done over asynchronous video or email, etc. So they're a really big problem. The challenge is if you want to solve for really big problems, often you need to instill a behavioral change, right? You want to show your users how they might do this differently. And that's difficult because they're used to certain workflows, certain ways of working. So first and foremost, I think you have to decide, are we going with a venture-backed model where you may not necessarily have to be profitable in the short run, but you're going for that really big vision and VCs are helping you move towards that? Or are you going for a bootstrap model, in which case you're going to have to find something that is immediately obvious to the user in the sense that they will immediately want to pay for it. And you would potentially be okay with moving towards that vision much later on. With Bubbles, we've consciously been looking for investors who are really excited by that remote future. You could even say present, but this future where we're not just working remotely, but we've also adapted our ways of working to working remotely. And so really trying to be on the frontier of that. That means that we don't necessarily have to be profitable, for example, this year or next year. But of course, we do need to show things like willingness to pay, because that ultimately validates product market fit, right?
Yeah.
Now, in addition to that, I, as a founder, believe that if we want to democratize this way of asynchronous working, a bottoms-up model makes a lot more sense than a top-down model, just because we cast a wider net and we will basically have a lot more people collaborate asynchronously. And so a product-first approach made sense for us. Of course, monetizing, but in a way that it is very accessible to, let's say, the individual, the freelancer who might be our early adopter, start sharing their clients. And then for those clients, those teams, they will want to pay because of certain features that those teams. So in our case, we have a typical premium model. You can use Bubbles for free. It's free forever. But if you need certain things like more granular access control, things that we expect primarily teams will need who are serious about remote work, then you would want to upgrade. And it would only cost you $8 per month if you pay annually.
Wow.
Now, that's important because at the end of the day, to reach that kind of scale, we cannot hire enough salespeople, right, to do that. And so we need our users to be advocates of Bubbles, right? And so creating a really good free plan is an integral part of that.
Yeah. It seems such an intricate way to go about building, because it kind of hinders on not knowing or knowing a lot about your user, but also testing a lot of different ways that might be, whether it's features or other incentives that allow users to stay on track with it. And then it's all this testing and getting all this information. And it seems like the more challenging model, but like you said, I think long term, it's a more effective model of building a product, especially one that affects the individual consumer so much. We had another founder that was talking about if the employees love it, then the managers have to use it, versus the other way around. If you go to the managers and then their employees are I guess requested or they're required to use it, it's a little bit less sticky in that respect, and you have a lot more friction. But tell us a little bit more about the traction. How many teams are using Bubbles? What's exciting about the growth you've seen so far, and where are you headed in this year, and what's exciting about this year's journey?
Yeah, so this year is really big for us because we introducing our paid plan. So we've waited with that for a long while because we're really focused on can we actually convince people to try asynchronous video and try to converse in asynchronous video, where before maybe they were used to broadcasting. Can we convince them to go back and forth over video? And so now that we feel that we've cracked that, we are moving to the next step, which is, are businesses willing to pay for this? And so currently, in terms of active users, is about 30,000 people or so that actively use Bubbles, that use it for team collaboration, to replace meetings, eliminate meetings, etc. We're happy with that to start, but of course this year will be really big for us, where we'll want to grow significantly and also start to focus a little bit more on the SMB markets, where previously we were in ours very much used by startups, freelancers, and agencies.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest challenges that Bubbles faces today?
Today, I'd say one of the hardest things is trying to not build everything, but also the things that you do need to build to make sure that they both make impact, but that they also bring you closer to that global maxima, right? You don't necessarily want to dig a hole that you can't get out of. And a lot of that is based on who are your current users versus who are your future users. And are the two compatible? Can you can you find a way to move from where you are now to that, that platform that you're working on and vision. So that's really hard. You will always think that you need to hire more people. You always think that you need to hire more engineers, more designers, more product managers, etc. So that's never going to go away. But if you can make the right decisions in terms of what to do and what not to do, I think you'll be really good at executing. And I think that really for a lot of startups, post-product market fit is really their major challenge.
Yeah. If everything goes though, what's the long-term vision?
So long-term vision is to literally kill the 9-to-5 workdays. So I want to see a world where life and work are in harmony. If the kids need some extra attention, that should be fine. If you need to do the laundry, that should be fine. If it's a great sunny day and you want to go to the beach, that should be fine. Your work shouldn't stipulate how you live. But at the same time, you should be able to be very productive and really move the needle for the company whenever and wherever. If you prefer to work on a Saturday, that should be up to you. This idea of only working on specific days and specific times predefined by society, I think is something that we need to move away from. Now, we already see that remote work is suddenly being accepted. I think what you'll see next is that remote workflows will be accepted. And I think as a result, you'll see that suddenly there's a lot less, people will care a lot less about, okay, where do you work from and when do you work, as long as we see the work being done.
Yeah. I'm always interested. I always like to start this next question. I call it my founder FAQ. So I'm going to give you some rapid fire questions and we'll see where we go. So first question is, what's particularly hard about your job?
I'm the CFO, I'm the CPO, I'm the CMO, and trying to balance all of that is really hard. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. What strategies do you use in terms of finding that balance? Is it and that you could give advice if another founder is in a similar position, wearing multiple hats, having different responsibilities? What's something that helps you stay on track that you would share with another founder?
Two things. So every week, think about what are the 3, 4, 5, 6 criticals that really need to get done. And then every day, pick one of them and don't stop until it's done. Also, don't really do other things, right? So you will have to focus and you'll have to be able to say no to the things that are not as critical. Second, I like to take a couple of hours each week where I block basically a brainstorm session for myself, literally with a whiteboard. I'll think about where do I want to be? Where are we? Just keep redrawing that kind of path, because even though you might have done that already a month ago, a week later, that path might have changed radically. Yeah. And you might also catch yourself not necessarily following the path, right? So you can make a plan, but it's hard to stay on track. And so by doing that for a couple of hours a week, I think I'm able to make those kinds of decisions and really do the more impactful work.
Yeah. Whether it's early in your career or now, what books or people have influenced you the most?
So I'm mostly influenced by people that I work with very closely, or close friends of mine, more so than books. I mentioned Patrick Hudenkamp. He was one of co-founders of HelloFresh. Amazing person. He's actually the one who's taught me to think about a dream state and then reverse engineer it. So really first principle approach of trying to break something down and then creating an actual plan and executing very tightly. Now, the other person is a very good friend of mine. He's the CEO of Flyer Labs, a very successful company. He has taught me not just to plan ahead, but to really seize every opportunity that comes your way, even if it wasn't in your plan, and to basically readjust that plan all the time while still moving towards that goal that you have in mind, right? So you don't want to be changing direction every day. That's going to result in you not really achieving any of these goals. But you do want to realize that the environment and the opportunities change every day. And so to be able to get to that goal, you may have to actually do different things than you had originally anticipated. So
Yeah.
those two combined and those two people, I think, have really influenced me in executing well. Lastly, I'm a software engineer. Originally, I've always been quite technical and product minded. So there's one book that I did appreciate in terms of becoming a leader of a team and at some point having a company of 150 employees.
Yeah.
Which was, I think it's called the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership or 14 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. I think it's a great book for really being conscious about how you lead and being aware of that there's a certain power dynamic in the position that you fill, and being aware of that helps you, I think, present yourself in a way that will help your team feel motivated and really do their best efforts.
Yeah. Yeah. I know we're coming to the close of the episode, and I do want to give you a chance to let us know your websites or your LinkedIn's. But before we do that, is there anything I didn't ask you that you wish I did or that you would have liked to answer?
As a founder, you're going to get a lot of advice from all kinds of people. And to be honest, sometimes all that advice is more noise than it is helpful. And so really, I would say stick to not necessarily your plan, but remember your higher level strategy, and then opportunistically keep redefining your plan. If the feedback you get from folks is related to that and actually helpful, then act on it, but don't change your approach. It's your company. There's a reason why it's your company and not theirs.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that advice piece because you're bombarded by so many people, even people in your inner circle. But I agree. It's told me once, it's like, keep the information tight enough so that it doesn't impact your day-to-day workflow, but spread the idea, get all the necessary pieces or feedback that you, but trust yourself. But at the end of the day, it's trusting yourself. Last little bit is, where can the audience find Bubbles? Where can we support you as a founder? Tell us all your LinkedIn's, your websites. Where can we start using the product and even be a supporter of you as a founder?
Yeah, go to usebubbles.com. It won't take you more than 5 minutes to really experience it. So try to make some time for that. I think it will really help you eliminate a lot of live meetings. It will help you save a lot of time. So it's usebubbles.com. And then you can reach me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Tom Medema, or find our contact details on our homepage.
Amazing. Tom, it was incredible learning about your founder story and kind of how you connected with your co-founder and are able to launch an incredible company that's really making the remote working environment and also extremely efficient. And I'm one that is not the biggest fan of meetings that are synchronous. And I love the thought of meeting up and connecting in ways that really fit around our schedules and honestly, our circadian rhythm and things that naturally energize our body and mind. So it's incredible to talk to you, learn about your company, and I hope you enjoyed yourself on the podcast today.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks a lot.
Good.